Now, this past week, and indeed past month, have been historically influential for the Nigerian judiciary. There are several states where they've overturned election results, showing how wide and deep the jurisdiction of the courts have become over Nigerian politics. Surfing the television and internet channels and scanning the newspapers in Nigeria, you'd be staggered by the tidal wave of news and interminable speculation about the judiciary and the growing perception that the relationship between judges and politicians has become too close. It's a relationship that's supposed to be held on a leash, but not anymore. At some point, someone threw open the doors, and the judiciary now has such a tangible presence in Nigerian politics that politicians are alleged to be tapping into the institution to proclaim all kinds of technicalities. Of course, to give preference to any political party or person is clearly unconstitutional, since that same constitution gives to all citizens the equal protection of the law. But ask critics, and they'll tell you that the judiciary now appears to be giving their interpretations of the law according to the immoral political climate of the time, a charge the judiciary, the ruling party, and the government all deny. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the respected constitutional lawyer, human rights activist, and senior advocate of Nigeria, Femi Falana. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you, Charles.
As judicial decisions go with regard to elections, how wild is the opposition idea that the courts seem to be using every technicality available to rule in favor of the APC?
Well, Charles, I'm not going to get engaged in the PDP APC, business, because both political parties, to be honest, have demonstrated contempt for the Electoral Act and total disregard for judgments and orders of court. So if people are caught in their own game, it is absolutely irresponsible to blame the judiciary. That is not to say that there are no problems, but to politicize the judgments would be, for me, very escapist. We must take them one by one. And we're talking about 4 judgments now. We had elections in 31 states. Governorship election in March this year. We're talking of 4 governorship election results that have been upturned by the court. 2 involving or affecting the PDP, 1 MPP, and the other one APC. So it's not about which party is right or which party is wrong, or the allegations. But what also bothers me, Charles, is the sheer hypocrisy of those who cause these problems for the country. I was reading a former head of state this morning. I couldn't believe. A former head of state who declared an election a do or die battle in this country, whose party said whether anybody liked it or not, his party was going to be in power for 100 years.
Well, actually, let's remove 40 years from that.
No, they later reduced it to 60 years. But the point I'm making is that we need to be honest with ourselves. And when leaders are wrong, and they have now learned, from the colossal mistakes they made when they were in power, they must also say, please, this is my experience. But when you now come out to say, this democracy won't work, you were in power for 8 years, it worked for you, or another leader, I've read another one, this judiciary is this. This was a guy who said, we were fixing elections. In 2003, we were fixing elections. I had to persuade my president, please let us concede a state governed by my friend. You know, don't let's rig that one. Now, the same people, the same characters insult Nigerians very greatly when they now reduce everything to, oh, this one is in power, therefore they are using the judiciary. Please, for goodness sake, we also must look at the way these election petitions are prepared and handled. These judges didn't witness elections because they are posted to outside their regions. Now, you now bring evidence before them. Charles, I say that I won an election, right? INEC says, oh, we didn't transmit result because there were some technical hitches. Okay. What of the results collated by your agents? What of your form ECAT? Have you done the collation so that you can then go to the court? I won the election and not the guy declared by INEC. That is the way election petitions are handled. But if you didn't do that, and judges have to rely on evidence adduced before them and give a decision, you cannot blame the judges. Secondly, as in the case of Plateau, and this is not the first time, if the court gives a decision, sorry, you have not conducted a valid primary. You ignore the judgment of the court and proceed to take part in the general election. And at the end of the day, you are being told that you can't claim to have won an election because there was no primary. If there is no primary, you can't have a valid election.
Right.
So but that is different from Kano.
Yeah, no, I
and
understand.
That's why you have to take them one by one.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you. Since you brought
Samfara, it's not been concluded. The judge said 3 local governments go and conclude elections in those 3 local governments.
Since you brought up Plateau State, let's deal with that first. Governor Muftwang got the most votes and actually won the election. But it ended up being a qualification matter, and whether it is pre or a post-election matter. Do you think Governor Muftwang has strong grounds for appeal to the Supreme Court?
Again,
you don't want to get into that.
It's going to be difficult to predict, but going by the decisions of our courts,
right?
Once a matter is in court and a judgment has been given, go and hold a valid primary. You ignore the judgment and proceed to hold an election. You have to convince the court that I have my justification for treating the orders of court with contempt. So if you cannot do that, there is a problem. There is a problem. Because every election, and then it is because people were imposing candidates on the electorate that the idea of primary came up, and that everybody must participate in a primary.
So the issue of the way the PDP was running its affairs in Plateau State comes into play. I mean, it seems from what you're saying bizarre that the PDP would present someone who is not qualified as their candidate, who gets voted in, only to be booted out by the courts.
You see, again, it can be either way. And this political party celebrates the judiciary when they win elections. In the case of Osun State, Oyetola and INEC, when that decision was handed down by the Supreme Court, people were dancing. And what happened there? The Supreme Court held that you need to produce beavers machines in the court. You need to, and it's not compulsory for INEC to transmit election results. And I think it was a minister, I think it was Mr. Festus Keyamo that said, oh, you guys are celebrating now. You may regret later. Now, when the presidential election, the tribunal, gave his decision, some of the lawyers who had canvassed in Osun State we're also now asking a lower tribunal to overrule the Supreme Court. So we must look at the role of our lawyers, the role of politicians, and the courts before we can just simply dismiss the courts.
No, I understand that. But are there any elements of political bias that you detect with the opposition political parties accusing the judiciary of killing democracy? Do they have any point? I mean, I know you said both sides do it.
You see, I am very, very critical of judgments that subvert the democratic process. And I insist that the democratic wishes of the people must be respected at all times, right? In this country, a guy his name was never on the ballot. He was never even in the country on the day of election. The Supreme Court held that he was deemed to have won the election, and the PDP went to town to celebrate. So that was 2007. That was how we began this dangerous journey of a few judges subverting the wishes of the people by interpreting the law. So, and what we have to do, just like the case of Rivers, never again are we going to allow anybody who never participated in any of the processes leading to the election to be declared the winner of the election. We must now take cognizance of the errors that have been made this time around. And I'm happy the Senate has held a retreat, I think in New York, a few weeks back, where they resolved that we're going next time around, we are rushing to the Parliament with the concurrence of the House of Reps to now make transmission of results compulsory. We have also suggested the judgment of the Supreme Court, where it was said that beavers machines be produced in court. It's going to be very cumbersome and sometimes almost impossible. If I'm challenging elections in about 50,000 polling units, which court hall will accommodate 50,000 beavers machines? So we are saying, rely on the report generated by the beavers machines, which can be, supervised by the agents of all the political parties that took place in an election. But we must also go back to the ways recommendations, which were largely adopted by the 2014 National Conference, adopted by the Ahmed Lemu Committee, adopted by the Ken Namani Committee, so that we can begin to hold elections.
Right. I want to come back to that very important issue of reforms, which is what you're making. But I just want to get past some of the other legal issues, because I mean, it's not every day that we have you sitting here. What about the fact that the courts are now bringing in people? You mentioned Kano, for example, who did not win to become governor on the basis of a technicality. I mean, doesn't that make nonsense of the whole point of democracy, which is that the people get to choose their own leaders?
In 2019, because the Supreme Court held that proper primary elections did not take place in Zamfara and Bayelsa State. Those two states had been won by the APC. The Supreme Court held that the PDP candidates in both states that had lost the election be declared the winners. And the largesse was extended to all the legislators in the National Assembly and in the state houses of assembly. But it was celebration galore then. But we are saying we must not celebrate the courts when we are favored. We must now have a common standard.
Absolutely.
Whereby, right, the wishes of the people must be respected. You cannot say you are going to punish me for the errors or even offenses of INEC or INEC officials, electoral officers, as was the case in Kano. That one is almost scandalous. And Charles, you'll be surprised if I show you the judgment. To my utter dismay, the majority judgment of the Court of Appeal in Kano upheld the appeal, set aside the judgment of the lower court in writing, and awarded cost in favor of the governor that was removed by the lower tribunal. So I'm asking myself, what's going on? Do you understand what I'm saying? Contrary to the impression that has been given out there, the judgment of the main judgment of the Court of Appeal has confirmed that the judgment of the lower court is wrong. Oh yes. And I set it aside in writing, upheld the appeal, granted all the relief sought by Governor Abba. So you ask yourself, what is going on?
Well, that's the question.
Yes.
What is going on?
So, some contradictions which the court can no longer explain, but which is likely to be taken up.
Right. Well, it is
by the
being
Supreme
taken
Court.
up to the Supreme Court.
These issues are totally unnecessary.
Yeah.
Nigeria is the only country today, that records the highest number of election petitions.
Yeah.
And why are we blaming the judges? Why are we not putting in place an electoral system that will punish those who violate the law with impunity? And that is what is going on.
Well, let me ask you this. Why is it that everyone else seems to be punished but INEC, even when it clearly is INEC's fault? If we look, for example, at Kano, the voters get sort of punished, the candidate gets punished or penalized or disqualified by the courts, but INEC, which is often behind some of the most dastardly cock-ups in elections, never seems to get punished. I mean, why is that? Is INEC above the law?
No. The law requires judges to punish on the basis of the evidence laid before them those who can be said to have manipulated the electoral system or who subverted the electoral system and make a mockery of the wishes of the people. In the past, I was reading one judgment a couple of days ago, I think it was your dad, the Honorable Justice Antonio Aniagolu, that recommended to the IG to deal with the Commissioner of Police, I think it's Imo, or one of the states in the southeast then, because of his role in the election. In those days, judges would recommend sanctions for electoral offenders. These days, we're only busy with the petitions. Who won the election? Who didn't win the election? What of those who had caused such problems?
And that brings me to the point that you have been making. You talked about setting up an election offences tribunal. Tell us more about that in the context, for instance, of recent elections that have taken place,
Charles,
where you think that ought to
it's
be
not my
the
idea.
case.
It's not my idea.
Right.
We once had an election in this country under the Olusegun Obasanjo regime, the 2007 election, the worst in our history, where the elected president, was honest to say, the election that produced me was highly flawed. And therefore, we must make a difference. We must put an end to this shame. And a panel was set up, a 22-member panel, headed by a retired Chief Justice, the Honorable Justice Mohammed Owais. And that panel came up with a number of recommendations to put an end to the disgraceful conduct of elections. One is that we have realized in the country that during elections or before elections, the police make arrests in all the states of the country. cases are filed in court. But because most of the time, the attorneys general appointed by some of the riggers of the elections will quietly withdraw those cases by filing nolle prosequi applications in court. On that basis, the panel recommended we should have an independent electoral offences commission to deal with those who breach the provisions of the electoral law. That has been rejected over the years. On the instead of embracing that suggestion, what has always been entrenched in the law, this time around section 145 of the Electoral Act 2022, is that INEC shall prosecute. We are saying that INEC is overwhelmed. You must unbundle INEC. Again, that is part of the recommendation of the Waste panel. Then, you must unbundle INEC to be able to concentrate on the conduct of election by having Electoral Offences Commission.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah. Also, a political party regulation body, commission, to also deal with registration of political parties, voter education, and so on and so forth. But those recommendations are being ignored. We now have this age of technology where African countries are leaving us behind. And I've made the point here. If you have the report of accreditation through the Beavers machine and election results that are transmitted, why do you want to stay in a tribunal for 6 months? To do what? In Kenya, it's 14 days. You file your petition 7 days after the election because all the election materials are available.
So why do you think that is the case in Nigeria? I mean, beyond the fact that that is the law.
Members of the political class do not want the system to work because they are taking advantage of the leakages and the loopholes in order to retain power. Not necessarily to serve the people, but to serve themselves. And that's why we're in a mess. So if we agree tomorrow, that we're going to hold successfully countries that are emerging from wars, Liberia, Sierra Leone, countries that Nigeria, took from under and will restore stability. Now they are holding elections. We are congratulating and we are clapping for them. So if we are decided, and it has to be a struggle, I can't see the members of the political class committing, as it were, class suicide by allowing credible elections. So it has to be a struggle by the Nigerian people to say, no, we're not going to allow this mess to continue.
I heard that you are part of a committee that's trying to enforce that, or a group
for sure,
of people.
For sure. Oh, yes. We can't go on like this.
Right.
I mean, I don't get involved in election petition, but I'm involved in campaign for electoral reform. And we're going to insist this time around. We can't go like this. Our children are asking questions. Our friends are asking questions. Some of us go around to monitor elections in African countries. And you're embarrassed when you are told, sorry, this is not Nigeria. We want to conduct good elections. And it shouldn't be so. The entire African countries, the entire black race, everybody is looking towards Nigeria to provide leadership. And we must start with good elections. What happened a couple of weeks ago was by far worse than what happened in March, or February, March this year. And so we are working with INEC to ensure that all those who were arrested are prosecuted. All those who were arrested in March, majority of them, their cases have been concluded. They must be tried in this country so that people will know that you cannot continue to make a mockery of the democratic process.
So we've got about a minute or so. Brilliant, as always, talking with you. But which is it? One of your colleagues, a senior advocate of Nigeria, who I won't mention their name, described what is going on in this country as the democracy being murdered by, he said, the politicians and the judiciary. You agree or disagree with that?
No, my position is that nowhere, no serious democracy allows the courts to determine the winner of elections. And we must put an end to it in Nigeria. With respect to politicians, we must put in place a mechanism for dealing with electoral offender, no matter how highly placed. Just like what is going on in the United States of America. President Trump is being prosecuted for interfering with the electoral process in Georgia. He's being prosecuted for the insurrection that took place in the Capitol on 6th of January 2020. Unless we go to that level here, people are going to continue to mess up the electoral process.
I want to thank you very much indeed. Hugely enlightening talking with you, as always. Femi Falana is a respected constitutional lawyer, human rights activist, senior advocate of Nigeria, and staunch advocate for electoral and judicial reform. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Shaz. My pleasure.